What is responsive web design? Well, responsive web design is about using HTML and CSS to automatically resize, hide, shrink, or enlarge a website to make the website look good on all devices. Devices like desktop devices, tablets, and phones, including smartphones. Now, I'd go one step further and say that this is not just about the art direction, okay? So when I say art direction, I mean the aesthetics. Responsive web design is also about the performance of a site, the latency, which I should say the amount of time something takes to happen for the user, which is very important. Latency will cause a user to potentially believe that they are having a good user experience or a bad user experience. So latency is your enemy. The longer it takes to do something, the more likely your user will think you're a loser. Okay? Save that one. All right, so what's the first thing we need to do for a responsive web design? Well, we need to set the viewport. So let's just take a look at this page for setting the viewport. The HTML5 introduced a method which would allow designers to take control of the viewport, and they do so through the meta tag. So we want to establish at the very beginning that we are providing a meta tag, and within that meta tag we are adding attributes and attribute values which allow for further function or for us to take control of this particular environment. So we're going to have our meta tag. Within the meta tag, again, we have attributes like name and content, and then we have our attribute values. So the name, the value is viewport. We're dealing with the viewport. Now our attribute content, we are now getting the width, device width. So this part sets up the width of the page, and this allows the screen width of the device, which will vary from device to device. Then we're also setting up an initial scale. So we're, dare I say, zeroing something out. We're setting the initial scale to 1. So we're finding out what that device is, and we are setting the scale to 1 to meet that device. All right, let's go back and we'll just move down here a little bit. Another thing we will work with are responsive images. And basically we just need to use CSS width and set an image to 100%. So now that image will be responsive, and that image will scale up or down based on the relative width of its container. And the whole idea with a responsive site is we are shrinking and expanding elements within our viewport. So if we set width of images to 100%, then our images will in fact be responsive also. As an example, we should probably be able to do something like this. Okay, so we can see that our image is in fact responsive. Let's go down a little bit further here. We can also work with minimum width, maximum width. So an image will only get so small, or an image will only get so large. This is something that we'll be working with in a later demo also, and this is using the picture element. And element, let me go back and just say the picture tag. This will become an element once we place content inside like we have in this example. Now the tag has become an element because the tag has content inside of it. But basically, the picture tag / element allows you to define different images for different browser window sizes. So like in programming, this would be creating an array, a list, and based on certain parameters, we would change our images. And in this case, a parameter could be the width of a device. It could even be pixel densities of devices. Responsive text. So the text can be set with VW, viewport width. And this way your text size will follow the size of the browser window. And this is something you might want to experiment with also. Responsive web design is also about using media queries. So a media query will allow us to establish a breakpoint or a variance of breakpoint, a minimum and a maximum of width. Okay. Responsive web design frameworks. I'm not a big fan of using frameworks because you're adding a lot of other content. You're adding a lot of other function which not all designs may require. So this is a personal preference. Nothing wrong with frameworks. Knock yourself out using them, just not in these exercises for our class. Okay, so basically we could use W3 School CSS framework. We could use Bootstrap. So what they're doing for the most part is creating columns, and within these columns we would add our content, and based on widths of our devices we may have more or less columns. It really depends on the design layout you're shooting for, but in these frameworks they build everything in the background and you just pick and choose what it is you want, which again is fine. Not my cup of tea, if you will, because again we are loading so much extra stuff into our document that our browser is now going to make more and more requests on the server, which brings on that evil enemy latency. All right, so the simpler we can keep things, the better. Now, I'm not saying never use a framework. I'm just saying use one when it's appropriate. If your site's really simple, then just use HTML and CSS. Maybe toss in a little JavaScript just because.